All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. Now, the stakes are always high when Alabama and Georgia square off on the gridiron. The Tide and Dogs have met for the national championship twice since 2017 and also twice in the SEC championship game just over the last 3 years alone. You knew that it was going to be a big one last night in Tuscaloosa between these top five teams, and it lived up to the billing and then some. Now, nobody really had it on their bingo cards last night that Alabama was going to jump out to the 28 to nothing lead early in the second quarter, but that's what they did. And Georgia showed the heart of a champion as we saw the dogs fight, scrap, and claw their way back, and eventually taking the lead late in this contest. But the resiliency of Alabama is that late touchdown throw, on their first play after trailing, after getting the ball back, when Jalen Milroe connected with the freshman sensation Ryan Williams, and of course the athleticism of Ryan Williams did the rest on that 75-yard touchdown scamper to give Alabama the lead. So of course the Tide went on to win this game by the score of 41 to 34. They are the new number one in the rankings. They're up from number four to number one. And honestly, nobody should really dispute that. Okay. You look at this game, it was an epic, it was a thriller. We saw two talented teams, two very talented teams, a lot of NFL talent on both of these rosters as well. I'll tell you like this, it is not out of the realm of possibilities to see both of these teams meet two more times this year. It's kind of like the equivalent because we've already seen, seasons where Alabama and Georgia have faced each other two times. All right. And it's kind of like that NCAA tournament vibe. Sometimes you get those conference foes that they end up facing each other four times, two times possibly in the regular season, then in their conference tournament, and then in the NCAA tournament. And of course, once you face somebody that often, you could simply throw, the rule book out because there's nothing that you can show them that they haven't seen already. But nonetheless, there's still a strong possibility that we see both of these teams in Atlanta for the first Saturday of December for the Southeastern Conference Championship game. And then, of course, there is a possibility that we could see these teams meet once again in the college football playoff. It's that real. But you look at this game, and once you look inside the numbers, that slow start by Georgia really took away their bread and butter, which is their running game. You look at it last night. Georgia only had 80 yards on the ground. Okay, that's something that we are unaccustomed to seeing from the Dogs. But credit to Alabama. Alabama, they got it going, and they got it going with their offense. Their offense dictated things. Their offense set the tone in this one, okay? And then their defense wasn't too shabby either. Three interceptions of Georgia quarterback Carson Beck. And of course, the fact that Georgia was in that deficit early on, it made them one dimensional on offense. And Carson Beck had to try to go out there and beat them. He almost did, okay? But some critical turnovers by this Georgia offense really helped us swing things in the favor of Bama. You look at Jalen Milroe, okay, and in this early portion of this college football season, just look at last night alone. 27 of 33 passing for 374 with two TDs and a pick. But in a very short period of time, Milroe has become a much better thrower of the football under new head coach Kalen DeBoer than he was under former head coach Nick Saban. You think about it. Last year, Milroe was more of an athlete. He could make the throws, but not as efficient as he is right now. And when things broke down, of course, he would take off. But now you're looking at it with him as a thrower. You still have to worry about that threat of him as a runner, but it just makes him and it just adds another wrinkle to this Alabama offense. Okay. And, overall, the transition for this team from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer so far has been seamless. And that's not easy because Kalen DeBoer walked into a very difficult situation. He's replacing a legend. That's not easy to do. Okay. And it's kind of like, this team has really not slowed down. And I mean, they lost some key players from last year's team. You lose Dallas Turner to the NFL. You lose Caleb Downs in the transfer portal to Ohio State. But nonetheless, this team is still rolling. Okay, there's still plenty of talent still on the defensive side of the football. There's still plenty of talent on the offensive side of the football as well. And nonetheless, I liken the transition from Saban to DeBoer, going back to another generation when Jimmy Johnson left Miami and Dennis Erickson took over. And like it was, some people were skeptical about it, but it was a seamless transition. And before you knew it, Miami was winning more national championships. So you look at it, it's a different vibe, and it's no disrespect to Nick Saban, but this is now Kalen DeBoer's team. And this team is feeding off of him. And at the end of the day, they're continuing to win and they're continuing to go out there and execute and do what they do best. So you look at it now for Georgia. And of course, for the haters, they're going to sit back and say, well, you know what? You're no longer in the SEC East anymore. You can't be protected. Well, we all know in the new SEC format, just like it is for most of these leagues, there's no more divisional format. So Georgia's got some tougher road games on their docket this year. This was one of them. Okay. They still got to go to Austin on the 19th of October and take on Texas. They still got to go to Oxford on the 9th of November to take on Ole Miss. So there's still some tough games on the docket for Georgia, and they've got to find a way, uh, you know, to get this thing on track because winning on the road, conference wise, is never easy, regardless of what league that you're in. But we've seen Georgia struggle in their first two conference games. They escaped Lexington 2 weeks ago with a win over Kentucky. They easily could have lost that game. All right. And then, of course, the results last night when, they fell short to the Crimson Tide. And of course, Georgia came into this contest ranked second in the nation. They've dropped to number 5. And they're going to need to get back on track both defensively and offensively. Okay. It's one of those where Carson Beck is a guy, he's not going to put this team on his back. Georgia is predicated still by their running game, and that's something they got to get back to doing in the coming weeks. And I think they definitely will, especially defensively. Georgia's got to go back out there and get back to that nasty. Alabama with the tempo, Alabama spreading them out, Alabama just throwing the football all up and down the field on this Georgia defense last night to the tune of 547 yards, albeit Alabama also gave up 519 yards as well. But, when you lose, it's a lot more that you got to go out there and clean up. And of course, Alabama did a bulk of their damage in the first half. Now, the Tide have looked pretty good so far. Okay. And this was another big test that they passed going on the road in the Big Ten 2 weeks ago and dominating Wisconsin. I know Wisconsin has 2 losses on the year, but it's still Wisconsin. It's still a marquee atmosphere, if you will, at Camp Randall, and it's still a power league. And they went out there, they took care of their business, and they've been steamrolling. Okay, for the most part. But again, they were rolling in the first half. The resiliency of Georgia to keep chipping away. But this defense still went out there and made the big time plays, and that's what it's all about. Games like this are why Kalen DeBoer was brought to Tuscaloosa last year from Washington. It's one of those where when Saban made the decision to step down, okay, of course the people there knew that like you got big shoes to fill, but you got to go out there and find the right guy. And Alabama has found the right guy to take over their proud and prestigious program. So not only with Kalen DeBoer coming in, but games like this is why Kirby Smart recruits you to go play for him at Georgia. It's these big type games, and it's the same thing before with Nick Saban and now with Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. This is why you're brought into these scenarios. It's kind of like, what we saw for the 80s and 90s with Florida State and Miami. It's kind of like what we saw in the 90s and 2000s with Florida State and Florida, you know, Alabama, LSU, any of these big time games, okay, over the years. This is why you're brought in here. And, you see like first round talent on both of these sidelines. I guarantee you, come next spring at the NFL draft, you're probably easily going to see six of the guys that you saw play last night hear their names called in round number one and shaking the hand of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. But nonetheless, you look at this contest, it clearly impacts the college football playoff race. Another key win for Alabama, and of course, the Crimson Tide. They can't let up because they there's not a lot of soft spots on their schedule either. They've got to go to Knoxville and take on Tennessee in a couple of weeks. They got to go to LSU in November. They still host Missouri. They still have to go to Norman and take on Oklahoma, and then of course the Iron Bowl at the end of the season for against Auburn. And like I said with Georgia, they still got to go to Texas. They still got to go to Ole Miss. They host Tennessee at home, and then of course they finished their season at home with Georgia Tech, an improving Georgia Tech team. So you're looking at this right now. Clear statement made by Alabama. It's back to the drawing board for Georgia. Clearly, of course, now with the expanded postseason in college football, you're not your season's not done, if you're the Bulldogs, but you definitely got to go out there and try to take care of your business now. Big time statement last night for Alabama. Let's see how they build off of that, and let's see how Georgia rebounds. But nonetheless, under the bright lights of the SEC at Bryant Denny Stadium, it was all about the Tide as they got the best of the Dogs. But folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, folks, my name is William Martin, and I'm signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.